As drummers, one of the tribulations of our craft is having to load our own gear out. And of course, of all the things we have to haul, the bass drum is the biggest of those components. It takes up a lot of room, it's not convenient to get through doorways, but it is often insisted that you have to have at least a certain size in order for that drum to be effective, especially in a live situation, which of course is the reason why we're schlepping all that gear around in the first place. So, I propose the idea, based on some experience with my old DW kit, that a smaller bass drum can be just as effective as a larger bass drum, especially with modern technology, miking, EQ, and a halfway competent sound man behind the board. So we're going to test that theory out right now. Now, as I had noted before, I had some experience with a DW bass drum that was actually a 16 by 18. And for its size, it was a pretty competent bass drum. I had it built without spurs or a tom mount, and I actually flew the thing on one of those DW cradles that kind of looks like a chrome-plated dead dog with its feet sticking up in the air. And it worked very effectively, and it sounded great. And the best part is, I could tuck that thing underneath my arm. So, whence cometh the 22 or 24-inch bass drum if an 18 or even a 16 can do the same job? Well, because I'm kind of a drum nerd anyway, and because I've got plans to make one for a much larger build project that hopefully we'll be seeing in the future on this channel, I wanted to build a 14-inch bass drum. Now, a couple of reasons for this. One, I've got a need for a 14 to hit the higher A note in this large Bosio-style setup that I want to build. But I was also noticing, looking through the Sonar catalog lately, that they're making drum kits with 14-inch bass drums right off the factory floor. And I thought, is it possible that that little critter can actually sound good? So I took a 12 by 14 Pacific tom-tom shell that I wasn't going to use it for anything else. And I had some bass drum hardware that would fit on that, including the spurs and the bass drum lugs and the claw hooks. And because I was planning on building that 14-inch drum for the Bosio-style kit, I had ordered a couple of 14-inch bass drum hoops. So with all those components together, I assembled the drum. Now, something to note with Pacific drums, the little mounting nubbins on the backside of the bass drum lugs are actually a bit larger than the tom-tom lugs. So the hole spacing is the same, but you have to enlarge the holes a little bit in order to make these things fit onto the shell. So I went through that, which means that thing will never be a tom-tom anymore, but that's fine. It was a bit of a sacrificial lamb. However, I couldn't go any shallower than 12 inches deep because of the bass drum spurs. Fully packed up and collapsed, these spurs still run the length of the shell. So if I did like a 10 by 14, you'd actually have a couple inches of spurs sticking out, effectively making the drum's smallest dimension 12 by 14 anyway. And in terms of the sound, I don't think it hurts that much. It neither hurts nor heals. So, I got the thing assembled, and then it came time to choose heads. Now, I may do a shootout on different kinds of drum heads on this little creature, because I have a feeling that it's probably the most critical component of that drum being able to sound like a proper bass drum or not. But what I ended up finding was a triple ply Aquarian snare head that apparently this was some kind of an experiment that didn't go well as far as snare drums. But Tim K over at Drum City was like, well, if you're looking for something, you know, thick and reinforced or something that you can use as a bass drum head in that small of a size, why don't you give this one a whack? So I did. And then I had an old 14-inch tom-tom head that I could whack a hole into to use as the front side so I could get a microphone up in there, because that was also an important part of testing this drum. So that's how the drum came together. Oh, and I also, instead of using a cradle, I started out using a cradle, but when I put the spurs on it, I needed some kind of a lifter. And I used something that I've had ever since my Navy days. I actually found some 1/4-inch plywood and made this little sandwich with 3/4 of an inch in the main section and a 1/2 inch where the pedal clamps onto, just so the jaw could actually get around it. Mounted like a curtain rod flange to it, and that actually accepts an L bracket, and it's a whole little construct, but that fits into a DW TB12 bracket on the underside of the drum. So the whole thing is completely self-contained. It is a proper bass drum. So anyway, that's the drum itself. Now let's test it out against a Pacific 18 by 22 inch bass drum. We'll hear it with a Lewitt DTP 340 Rex bass drum microphone, which is, I think, is kind of like a Shure Beta 52 in a lot of ways. And we'll also hear what the drums sound like through a Lewitt LCT 240 Pro, which I used as the mono channel room mic. And also we'll hear how the audio sounds through the iPhone camera microphone. So we'll have 3 different perspectives to listen to these drums, and then we'll compare the sound and draw our conclusions. All right, at some point I'm going to have to start using a different drum solo in order to demonstrate this stuff. I think the BS Klangfarben might be wearing out its welcome, at least from my perspective. I've been playing this thing over and over again. So part of the sound engineering on this thing was that when I put everything into Cubase, I EQ'd each bass drum to where I thought it sounded as good as I could get it, based on my limited mixing skills. So in the case of the 22, I did what I could to emphasize the beater hit against the head and to actually draw down some of the overall boominess of the drum itself. And then on the 14, I also tried to emphasize the beater slap, but I also tried to boost the best of its low-end frequencies to see just how much we can draw out of this little drum electronically. Because I feel like if you can do that in Cubase using a plugin, you can probably do it on the soundboard as well using your, ultra smooth British style EQ. So we'll see. That's kind of how I got the sounds that I got. So it was not EQ'd flat. I figured the flat response can be caught by the room mic, which I did not EQ, and by the iPhone mic, which doesn't have any of this stuff on there. I mean, I could load that audio into Cubase and mess with it, but we're looking for something, a dry reference point, right? Something that approximates standing in the room with the thing. So anyway, that's how that was put together. So I'm overall pretty satisfied with the results. I think if I had to drag a 14-inch bass drum with me on a gig in lieu of any other bass drum, I think it would perform well. But I would also bring my own microphone and, if necessary, a sound system to amplify the thing, because I think if I had to put this thing on a stage and expect that sound to get out to the audience on an ambient basis, that would be absolute folly. But on the other hand, in most situations, everybody is going to have some kind of amplification. And at this point, that includes the drummer. And I'll be making another video about that stuff. So anyway, I'm pretty happy with how the little drum turned out. I'll certainly try to find a use for it wherever I can. Ultimately, I'll have to strip the hardware when I do the big rebuild project. But until then, I've got this nice little beastie in my arsenal. And it's been a lot of fun to play with it. So anyway, we'll close out with a little bit more drum soloing. And until next time, I'm Mike Lindsay. Thanks for coming out.